Okay, so if you were not here last week and did not get last week's handout, we have a few extra, and Carrie is prepared to hand them out. If you'll raise your hand, she'll be glad to get some to you. And then on the table back there is a new handout for a little bit more information for this week. And Carrie, I see Paul Bean over here has his hand up. Okay, so while she's handing those out, I think George up here wants one. She'll get to you sooner or later. Hendricks. With an X. I remember that now. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, George wanted one. Okay, so last week we did some review. We talked about the different views of the millennium, amillennial, postmillennial, premillennial, and then we talked about views of the rapture in relation to the premillennial view. Some who are premillennialists say that the rapture occurs at the end, and just before the second advent. It occurs at the end of Daniel's 70th week. Some say it occurs near the middle. Some say it occurs to initiate Daniel's 70th week. And that would be the pre-trib rapture viewpoint, and that's basically what the position that I take, and I think that this church basically takes as well. So we reviewed that, and one of the questions that comes up in looking at the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and 25, and this discourse is also found in Mark chapter 13 and Luke chapter 21, okay? And so if you're going to look at this discourse, you really ought to be taking all three of those, what we call the synoptic gospels, and correlating the information that each one brings out. Because particularly Luke brings out a few points that you don't find in Matthew and Mark, okay? And we had a section here where I talked about God's wrath, so you have the notes on that already. We're not going to review that. And what I wanted you to get to thinking about was in the week leading up to this discourse, from the time that Jesus enters Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday, I want you to think about everything that goes on in those few days and what kind of impact this would have had on Jesus' disciples. Or even ask yourself, if you were there, what kind of impact would this have had on you? So I listed out there in the notes some of the key events that I think would have played significantly on their thinking and on their attitudes. You have that triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. By and large, how did the crowds react to Jesus coming into Jerusalem? They hailed him as either a great prophet, or some of them even as they were hoping he's the Messiah, the promised Messiah, okay? Of course, on the other hand, the religious leaders, what was their response? Some of them are telling Jesus, make your crowd get quiet, okay? And Jesus is saying, you know, if I told them to be quiet, I think the stones might cry out instead, okay? One of the first things that's recorded after he comes into Jerusalem is the cleansing of the temple. All right, so he goes in there and he's righteously indignant that the house of the Lord has been turned into a merchant's exchange. All right, and so he upsets the tables and everything. And, you know, if you're the disciples and you're seeing Jesus do that, what might you be thinking? So speak up. Yeah. What's he doing here? This is going to attract the wrong kind of attention, all right? especially from the religious leadership. And in fact, it is rather surprising that in the temple precincts, they had their own temple guards. And you're wondering, where were they during that incident? Because in most cases, somebody doing something like that would have been arrested by the temple guards. All right, next thing. The religious leaders in Jerusalem there, they come, and it seems like one after the other, and sometimes some of these groups get together. You know the old saying, politics creates strange bedfellows. And there's times when some of these groups get together, and normally they wouldn't cooperate like this, and they try to throw questions at Jesus intended in some way to embarrass and discredit him before the people. But they don't want to come out right and accuse him of blasphemy or arrest him or anything like that, because they're afraid of his popularity with the people. Again, if you're the disciples, how does Jesus handle all of those questions? How well does he handle them? Perfectly. He defeats every one of those questions, okay? He is not tricked. He's not embarrassed at any point. In fact, the answers that he provides demonstrate great wisdom on his part. Now, if I was one of the disciples, their response, I think, is still mainly in the flesh. I think they'd be really proud. Would be possibly one response there. Okay? Any other ideas? Okay. Then he denounces the scribes and the Pharisees, though. After all those questions come to him, and I skipped, with those questions and everything, there's also several parables about the kingdom included in chapters 21 and 22 of Matthew. Then, chapter 23 of Matthew, he denounces the scribes and the Pharisees. Scribes, some of you may have English Bible versions that translate that as lawyers, all right? And the reason why is because the scribes were not only those with training in reading and writing, but they were also trained in interpretation of the Mosaic law and how to apply that in daily living, okay? So throughout the woes of chapter 23, you have this continual condemnation of the scribes and Pharisees for different reasons. And it closes, chapter 23 closes in verse 37 with Jesus saying this: Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. Must be the cold. I'm seeing double here. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, verse 38, behold, your house is being left to you desolate. All right? That's a key statement there, I think, as far as the disciples' thinking goes. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But hang on to that, okay? So he makes that statement. There's still this issue of his popularity with the crowds. At least, it sounds like from the Gospels that at least a couple of evenings, Jesus retires to the Mount of Olives for the evening. Mount of Olives, just a short distance away across the Kidron Valley. And the Mount of Olives is, I think, about 150 feet, using round numbers, higher in elevation than where the temple is. You have this magnificent view looking down at the temple precincts and everything. And the disciples might be thinking, okay, Jesus, Mount of Olives, Zechariah chapter 14, particularly verse 4, where that messianic passage anticipates the Messiah coming to the Mount of Olives. Okay, so, in their minds, what kind of reaction might that engender? Expectation, okay? Then But Jesus makes this statement here about, behold, your house is being left to you desolate. And so as they're moving from the temple area to the Mount of Olives, okay, the disciples, I think, they're looking at the temple built by Herod. The work on that began somewhere around 20 BC. It's now, we'll say, about 33 AD. And the work on this thing is not going to be completed until 64 AD. But nevertheless, the temple, the sanctuary, the main functioning of it is all there, is in place, and it is absolutely magnificent. And there are great stones that were mined from a quarry underneath Jerusalem that were used to help build that temple. I mean, enormous stones weighing multiple tons. And so you read there in chapter 4, Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And I forget which of the other Gospels, either it's probably Mark, where they are pointing to those great stones, right? And there's a certain amount of, even though they themselves have nothing to do with the building of it, there's a certain amount of pride, I think, in what they're pointing out, okay? It doesn't belong to them personally, but it does belong to the nation, and it's the focus of their religion. All of that temple and all those great stones that built it up. And so they point that out, and I think to them, this is their way of saying, we've got this temple. The crowds love you. You've defeated the religious leaders. Isn't this the time? Does that make sense to you? Okay. And then Jesus turns around, and in one sentence, he squashes all of their hopes. Right? And he said to them, do you not see all these things? Truly, I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down. Wow. And that would be an amazing feat. It's taken decades to get this temple to the point where it is now, and Jesus is saying it's all going to be torn down. What's the first question going to come to your mind? When? When? Okay? All right. So he's sitting there on the Mount of Olives. The disciples come to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? I have there kind of the questions outlined from Matthew, Mark, and Luke on the back side of that handout from last week. So that kind of gives you a summary of how each of those Gospels handled the question. But here's something else to think about that this didn't even really occur to me until last night. And that is, from the disciples' perspective, if this temple is to be destroyed, pretty much implies that the city as well is in danger, okay? And in Jewish history, so when Jesus makes this statement about not one stone being left upon another, I think the disciples, they're not ignorant concerning their history. And I think one of the first things that's going to pop into their minds is he talking about something like what happened with Babylon back at that time? Is that going to happen again? So again, the question, when? Right? And so they tell, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? George. That Jesus himself would destroy the temple? That would be a new one on me. That never crossed my mind, and I haven't seen anything that suggests that. Okay? Any response to that? Kes? Corey?
He was kind of accused about, after his arrest, that he was, wanted to destroy the temple.
Yeah, he was falsely accused of that. It was more based on their thinking that he was saying things contrary and doing things contrary to the law. Okay? and from there they made a false inference. Okay? So I don't think the disciples would have fallen into that false inference. Corey?
I was just right before George said that, I was reading verse 3, and they come to him and say, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And they're obviously have to be referring back to this thing he's just shocked him, by saying there won't be a stone there. So I was wondering, why are they linking that event to his coming and the end of the age?
Okay, good question. I like that question. Okay? When they ask this question, are they thinking in terms of us, like today? We're 2,000 years later, and we're asking, when's the end of the age? Okay? Are they thinking the same way? They're Jews. No, they're not thinking 2,000, 3,000 years into the future, wanting to know when's this all going to end, all right? And they're thinking the destruction of the temple, all right, and the potential ransacking of Jerusalem is the end of their age. And Jesus is making this sound like this is imminent. Okay? So I don't think that they're looking that far ahead. Okay? That's how I would approach this. And that gives me the opportunity to just offer kind of this warning. When you interpret a passage like Matthew 24, 25, or any of the Olivet Discourse passages, the temptation is to take our understanding, our viewpoint from this point in time and try to read that back into then. And this is why I'm taking you through this exercise here, is to try to get you to think from their viewpoint then. Terry?
It does imply that they're anticipating from all that he said that there is going to be a second coming of him, because they asked him of your coming.
Yes, yes. It does anticipate he's coming again. But from their viewpoint, what are they thinking? If the temple is destroyed, if Jerusalem is destroyed, Jesus, for 3 years, they've been following him, right? And he's been talking about the kingdom. Kingdom is God is at hand, okay? So, if they put 2 and 2 together here, if all that's going to be destroyed, he has to come again to establish this kingdom he's promised, all right? It's as simple as that, okay? Jake?
Kind of what Terry was saying, modern Jews teach that there's two messiahs. There's going to be one that comes in the form of peace, and then there's going to be another one that comes that actually is a conquering king. I guess that's what they teach in modern day Judaism, that they're expecting, because if you read the Old Testament, it teaches that there's two. That there's the one that comes in peace, and then there's another one that comes and brings war and the conquering aspect of it. And they miss Jesus Christ. And so I think that's kind of what they're seeing too, is they see the conflict of
Okay, yeah, good point. The disciples and the people are still dealing with the apparent contradiction of a humble Savior, a humble Messiah, and a conquering Messiah. Is that? Yeah, okay. Somebody else. Mary Ann.
Well, don't you think that everyone over the centuries who has read this believes it's in my time? I mean, it's going to be soon. The end
Yeah.
is coming soon.
Yeah, Mary Ann is saying, don't you think that pretty much everybody in every age that's been a Christian has thought, oh, it's my age, it's my time, okay? And that's that tendency to take our perspective and read it back in here.
History bears that out.
And history bears it out, yes. Okay. All right. Now, I have a paragraph, short paragraph of 4 bullet points there. What can be inferred from what Jesus answers here? A couple of things that are really important to get a grasp on. And that is, as Jesus answers this, Israel is a nation at the time of what he describes here, these signs and everything. Israel is a nation with a physical presence. Okay? That is assumed in the Olivet Discourse. And the second thing is that there's a functioning Jewish temple. and I don't know if any of you keep track of this, we are actually extraordinarily close to a functioning Jewish temple. They even have the red heifer now that's needed for the purification. All right? It's just all waiting for the opportunity to be built back where the Dome of the Rock sits right now, and that's an obvious problem. Okay?
But they've been working on that. In other words, they've kind of thought that for the last, I don't know how long, but.
Well, ever since the nation was reformed in 1948.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Kess?
You're waiting for the red heifer, and I don't know what the importance is of the red heifer.
The basic importance,
Can't figure it out.
the main importance is that they need its sacrifice for the purification of the temple once it's set up.
And
Okay.
it has to be a red one.
Yes. Yeah.
And for a long time, they couldn't get a pure one, and now they finally have.
Now they have.
Well, they always seem to find something wrong with it before they.
Okay. Well, there was a big celebration just a few months ago about they not only have one, they have multiple ones. Okay. We got two questions. I'll go with Kess first, and then I'll go with you. Okay.
Well, my main reservation is about this new temple thing is that after the destruction of the Herodian temple at the end of the war, and I mean, you could say the whole economy of the temple and the priests and everything were kind of pretty much left out of the picture, and rabbinic Judaism that was kind of probably came out of the Pharisees more or less, they reinterpreted, basically redefined the Jewish religion as it persists to this day, and for them to go back all the way to the sacrificial system and temple services, that would be a huge
Shift.
shift.
Yeah. Okay. So.
I don't think it's going to happen.
So Cass is questioning, okay, in Judaism today, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, you had already had the synagogue functioning ever since back in the time of the Babylonian captivity. And after the destruction of the temple itself, all of the emphasis shifts to the synagogue and the synagogue worship. And in modern day Judaism today, especially as we see Judaism here in the United States, okay, there's no expectation on the part of the Jews of their temple ever coming back and rebuilding it and offering sacrifices again. That actually, as I understand it, okay, comes out of a small segment of more, I guess we'd call them more, can I use the term ultra-Orthodox Jews? Okay. But you're saying you're having a hard time believing that, and yet the evidence is out there. We keep reading these reports. They've got the cornerstone ready. They've got the musical instruments ready. They have the clothing that the priests are going to wear ready. They have the red heifer ready. There's a group that has all of this, okay? So they're hoping for that. Whether or not it'll come about in our time, I don't know, okay? Or at any time, okay? Prophetically, it looks like it's going to happen. Okay. Janice, I didn't get to yours. Is the red heifer alive? Yes. Yes. Okay. How long does a cow live? Jake, where's Jake? How long does a cow live? Okay. All right. All right, but you know, yeah, one more question, and then we're going to get back on track here. Charlotte.
When you said maybe the temple's going to get built, doesn't it have to be built because that's where Satan goes in the last 3 years, or?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, if we interpret Bible prophecy using our literal natural hermeneutic, yes, the temple needs to be there. Okay? All right. But, no more questions for a second. Here's one of the things I want to get at. How many of you have actually read all of the Olivet Discourse recently? Okay? All right. What are the two, the disciples put these questions out. Does Jesus answer the questions? Yes, basically he does, okay? But what does Jesus focus on? Let's put it this way. What do we want to focus on? We have the same questions, don't we? When is this going to happen? Okay? I've taught prophecy classes in the past, all right? And everybody gets all worked up about signs, okay? I mean, I'm surprised somebody here, well, maybe not this group, okay? But I guarantee you there's somebody out there saying the earthquake in Syria and Turkey is a sign that he's going to be here tomorrow. Okay? We get all worked up about that. All right, that's our focus. What does Jesus want your focus to be? He gives us two big lessons out of this, especially in chapter 25. Paul?
Don't be deceived.
Number one, don't be deceived. We're going to talk about that, okay? What's number two? To occupy till he comes, or let's expand on that a little bit. Yeah. In other words, if you look at the parables, particularly at the last half of chapter 24, and then continuing into 25, Jesus places all the emphasis on what are you going to do in the meantime? I'm giving you a few answers here, but how are you going to live? In fact, and he keeps emphasizing of the day and the hour no one knows. Now, here's a question for you. If you knew the exact day that Jesus was coming back, and let's say you're an unbeliever, you know the exact day. You've heard that from believers, okay? So you know that, on such and such a date, Jesus is coming back. What might your response to that information be?
Accept the Lord the day before he comes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to live it up until the day before. And then on that day, well, maybe the night before, I'm going to repent and make myself right with the Lord. Right? Okay. That's our sinful tendency. Yes, sir?
I don't know of anybody outside. People in the world would think that, but Christians wouldn't think that.
Yeah, and that's why I said we're imagining a non-Christian here.
There's instructions to us about looking at what is happening in the world with various things that we see.
Okay?
So
Now,
it's just a warning to us.
it's a warning. Yeah, Paul.
Well, the question is relevant to the believer in terms of what are we doing?
Yes, what are we doing?
It is relevant to us, and, we're not going to go out and eat, drink, and be merry, but what are we doing?
Yeah. Okay. So if you have the other new handout that was handed out today, I give you kind of a little summary from all those parables. And I'm just going to go through this really fast here. See, like the parable of the fig tree. What does that tell us? Luke adds an interesting thing because there's been some premillennial, pre-tribulational, dispensational interpretations of this that say that the fig tree represents Israel. Okay? The problem with that interpretation is that comes in the context of this generation will not pass away. If generation there means generation in the sense of a typical, say, 30, 40-year span, we're 75 years past the budding of the fig tree, which is the reinstatement of Israel as a nation. So there's been a gradual moving away from that interpretation of Israel being represented by the fig tree, okay? But nevertheless, Luke adds not just a fig tree, but other trees as well. So I think combining what Matthew and Luke say, they're just making a general statement. What's going to happen here starting in March, as far as spring is concerned? You're going to start seeing trees budding out. And what does that mean? Spring's here, summer's not far behind, okay? It's a very simple principle. Okay, it's just an observation. Okay, I got 5 minutes left. All right. It's just a simple observation that when you see all these things, okay, that Jesus refers back to, the various signs that he provides here, And when he says that, I think he's including mainly not what he talks about in verses 4 through 8 of chapter 24, but starting with the desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet and what follows from that point. So he's talking about, I think, the signs of the Great Tribulation. And so when you see the desolation, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies that Luke tells us about, false Christ and prophets, unparalleled events of great tribulation, great astral signs, those things are represented by the budding out of the fig tree or any tree as it nears summer. Okay? That's just a quick summary of my own position on that. All right. You have the days of Noah. What was going on in the days of Noah? What was Noah doing? He's building an ark, and by virtue of building an ark, what is he doing? He's preaching to the people that God's getting ready to judge us. Okay? Judgment is coming. All right? What is the people's response? They just go on with their daily living. Right? All the things common to daily living, they just go on and ignore the signs. All right? What should they have been doing? Pay attention to the signs. Okay? Pay attention. Pay proper attention. By what? Repenting. Okay? The parable of you can read over that, okay? But the same theme comes out in every one of these in the sense of being prepared, watching for the signs. But in watching for those signs, prepare yourself. Be watchful. Be waiting. Be expectant. Okay? But don't go off like a chicken with your head cut off about every little thing that you think is a fulfillment of prophecy. Be careful about that. Now that brings me back to that other question. He warns them in verses 5, starting in verse 5, chapter 24. Many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Christ, and will mislead many. And you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See to it that you're not frightened, for those things must take place. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. All these things are, my version says, supplies merely the beginning of birth pangs. Okay? All right. And he warns them, you put this together with the other ones as well, don't be deceived by that. Now, how can those events like earthquakes and famines and pestilences and wars and rumors of wars, how could those mislead you or me? They're constantly happening, right? They've been happening, right?
Well, how many people saw Napoleon as the Antichrist? How many people saw Hitler as the Antichrist?
Yes. And Henry Kissinger and yeah. Yes, yes.
And so the thing is that we try to contemporize, we try to think that it's us now immediately because that's all we know.
Yeah.
And so it's a natural fallacy for us to do.
Yeah. So don't be misled. Don't take those. See, here, this is what the disciples are doing here. The disciple, I'll get to you, Paul, but this is important. The disciples are looking at the current situation, and from that, from the signs that they are seeing, they're trying to interpret what's going to happen. They're trying to make their own interpretation. And in a sense, they are contributing to their own, how do I say this in English? They're misleading themselves. They are misleading themselves. Because all along, like most of the people of Israel, they had a false expectation, or let's use a more contemporary term. Jesus and what Jesus was saying about the kingdom and what Jesus' plan was did not fit their narrative. Did it? Didn't fit their narrative. Yeah. Paul?
Well, that's in verse 12 in Matthew 24. Because of the increase in wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And standing firm to the end is hard. And so the sooner he comes back, the better for
Okay?
but we still have to stand firm. So there's some of that, and I know there's some days you go, just come today, God.
Yeah.
We have to persevere. And
Yes.
that's hard to do.
Yeah. All right, so I got 2 minutes left. I'll close on another important point here. First off, don't be misled. Don't try to take your own interpretations on this and start getting all worked up about Jesus is going to come tomorrow. But at the same time, live expectantly, right? His coming, from our perspective, if we believe in that pre-trib rapture, his coming is imminent. And there is no prophecy that has to be fulfilled in order for Jesus to come. No prophecy has to be fulfilled in order for him to come. Now, that doesn't fit Matthew 24, does it? Which then means that from a pre-trib viewpoint, Matthew 24 and the signs that Jesus is talking about basically occur after the rapture during what we call the 7-year period of Daniel's 70th week. And that's a fulfillment. And I give you the passages there, and you can look at that. But that's the 7-year period in which it appears that the Antichrist is on the rise, makes a treaty with Israel. There's some speculation maybe that treaty makes the rebuilding of the temple possible. And then at the midpoint of that 7-year period, he breaks that covenant with Israel. And then that initiates what we call the time of the Great Tribulation. So that most of what Jesus is saying here is dealing with that 7-year time period, not the church age. And in fact, when you read through here, the church is not here. The nation is. Israel is here. It's evident in the reading. But the presence of the church in this passage is not all that evident. Okay? But here's the genius of the answer that Jesus gives here. And that is, whether all of this application that comes out of the parables as to how to respond to this, whether you're a Jew who's come to believe in Christ during the tribulation period, or you're a believer of this age, don't we all live in anticipation of his return? Shouldn't we all be conducting our lives in such a way as to be prepared for his coming? Now, for the Jew in that tribulation period, they could almost nail it down to the day that he's going to show up. For us, no clue. It could be any time. But the application is the same. Yes, Kiss.
When you're saying about the Jews as a nation and so forth, are you saying that, are you including those Jews who believe in Jesus, or all of them? How do we say? Yeah, one more word. I mean, it says in verse 20th, and if the Lord has not shortened the days, no human would be saved, but for the sake of the elect,
Right.
whom he chose, he shortened the days.
Okay.
So who are those elect?
Who are those elect? Okay.
He chose?
That's a valid question. And
Because basically the church, the word church in Greek is also ekklesia, yeah? We know, it's using basically the same word, elect, eklektos, and here ekklesia, they seem to be almost like coming from the same root.
I haven't looked at that. Kess is wondering if the word elect and the word for church have a common root there. I'd have to go back and look at that, okay? But yeah, that could be an argument you might bring in from a postmillennial or an amillennial interpretation, okay? We got to close here. I don't say I can solve all the problems here, okay? What we're trying to do is, like in detective work, who committed a murder, we're trying to find the simplest explanation that explains the greatest number of facts. Okay? Let's close. Father, thank you again for just bringing us together this day, and may we take from our understanding of this passage a clearer commitment to living before you expectantly, to be watchful, to be waiting, to be using the gifts that you have given us for the furtherance of your plan, for the spread of the gospel. And Father, may we always do this and keep a sense of your imminent return in mind. And I just thank you for the class here, for their participation today. And just ask, Father, that you continue to bless this study as we continue on into Revelation. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.